Yeah, hi Nicholas. Nice talking to you today.
Nice talking to you, Jan.
Yeah, so I'm interested. You wrote a book. Was it last year that you wrote that EMF book?
Yes, it was published around 6 months ago.
6 months ago, yeah. So it's called the Non-tinfoil Guide to EMFs, and
Yes.
it's a very interesting topic for me. I've been watching this for years, and I've actually been thinking I should do the work and look it up, and you already did it, which is great. It's very
You're
good.
welcome.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about you and who you are and how you got to writing this book and the whole background.
Sure. Well, I'm a health journalist from Montreal, Canada, and I started writing about health, almost 10 years ago online, just out of personal interest. I was a copywriter for TV at the time, so I've been always writing and loved writing. At the beginning, I had just a blog for friends and family in French language, and eventually I decided to publish my information in English, tried to make it a business. It took years, and eventually I started not promoting, but writing an ebook about nutrition mainly, which was my main interest at the time. Trying myself to better my health, trying to starting getting in the real food movement, paleo movement, and these kind of things. And eventually, I started a newsletter called Nick and Jan's Healthy Life, and I've been publishing this daily newsletter for I'd say I have maybe 10% practitioner and 90% people that are from the public on the list and that follow me from all around the world. We have thousands of subscribers, and I was just reporting on my findings and basically the findings of people like, well, Dr. Klinghardt, Dr. Mercola, that I love his work a lot. I've been following it for years, and reporting on all these different sources in holistic medicine and trying to make it simpler for people. 2 years ago, I started reading a couple of books that really shook me to the core. Among these, Deborah Davis' Disconnect, that really opened my eyes to the potential, let's say, downsides of wireless technologies.
Mhm.
And I decided to dive deeper because it looks like most people ignored this, but it looks like at the same time, Deborah Davis is such an authority when it comes to epidemiology, and she's a PhD scientist that has such great work and credibility around her name. So I was wondering, okay, why would someone with this kind of background and this entire career behind her risk or career over choosing a topic that's not credible? And it turns out, from what I found, it's extremely, not only extremely credible, but essential to understand EMFs. And this is why I wrote the book. I tried to put all the books that were available on the topics together in a guide that's more user-friendly and easier to digest, so to speak, and with some added humor here and there, because I found the topic very, very daunting and kind of overwhelming when you first look at it.
Yeah, it's kind of maybe one of the neglected topics so far, and
Yeah,
maybe even scary for people because they. I talked to a person this morning and I told him about it, and he's like, "Oh my goodness," like I didn't
exactly.
think about it. Yeah. So basically, oh, let me ask you, what was the name of the newsletter? I think that wasn't easy to be understood.
Sure, it's Nick and Jan
Oh,
with a G, uh, Nick and Jan's Healthy Life.
okay, great. So
So if you type my name on Google, or Nick Pineault, Pineault, you'll find it.
people will find it. Okay, great. Um, so yeah, tell me roughly, what did you find when you started researching the EMF science, the EMF data?
Well, I found that, there's two sides of the story. You find people that say there's no science whatsoever. These people, it seems that they haven't read the science, or they don't want it to be true. They have a bias towards EMFs do nothing. This is non-ionizing radiation. This is low-level radiation. There's nothing to worry about. Then you have people on the extreme side of things that say EMFs are the end of the world, everyone will die, and EMF activists that have a kind of alarmist message that is also, I think, also repels the public and practitioners alike, because it seems a bit over the top.
Mm.
In the middle, you have credible scientists, and you have, well, the World Health Organization, for example. In 2011, they put together a committee at IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. That is, well, that's something credible for you. It's something super mainstream. And they looked at the current evidence in 2011, 7 years ago, and they declared, okay, there is not sufficient evidence to say it's a definite carcinogen. That would be class 1 carcinogenicity. It's not a 2A that is probable. It is a 2B possible carcinogen. But then the same researchers, when you look at the ones that are still active and that were on this committee, they were almost 35 PhD scientists on this committee. There's 6 to 8 of them that say, according to the same criterion we used back in 2011, nowadays in 2018, it's either 2A or class 1, based on the exact same assessment of the science. That's what I want to say, including Leonard Hardell. He's a guy from Sweden. He's the one that first said Agent Orange is a carcinogen back at the end of the 70s. Mm-hmm. So it's something, just that this is super mainstream science. And then I'm interested in what is credible. So what's credible is also countries that are taking action in reducing the levels as a precautionary measure, not as a measure that says, oh, it's definitely a problem. They're more conservative than that. They will say, well, we think it's the current evidence is strong enough to support action on the federal level, let's say in France, Belgium, Israel, India. Several countries are actually taking action in reducing these levels. In the meantime, in North America, free market and all these great ideas and, well, lobbying, a lot of reasons, we do the opposite. We don't have any particular regulations that are going to come in place anytime soon. There's a lot of lobbying from a number that I heard is 100 billion per year just for Congress. From the telecoms. That's from Joel Moskowitz I think he's from UC Berkeley. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pressure to keep this information under the rug and to not do anything. And in the meantime, the levels are increasing every year because of the number of devices is increasing. And so our exposure to something that we don't know is dangerous or not is increasing. And that's a concern for me.
Yeah. So I see cell phone towers in school grounds, and I see them in churches, and I see them all over the place. And what I'm hearing about the next generation, the 5G, I'm hearing that they're going to put a raster over every city and put the 5G antenna wherever it's best for the reception. If that's your backyard, if that's the street. Do you know anything about that part?
Sure. So 5G is the next iterations of our cellular communications, and it's instead of being in the microwave range like it is actually, there's a type of frequency. It's going to be in the millimeter wave range. So that's the same signals used by these TSA scanners that a lot of people avoid. Well, it's going to be that 5,000 times a second if someone uses a 5G iPhone next to you. So it's anyway, that's another rabbit hole, but basically it's going to be 30 gigahertz instead of 3 gigahertz, something like that. So this is
level.
Yeah, this is higher level, but at the same time, when you go up in this range, you have shorter waves. So it means high power, low distance. So you need to have more antennas. And these are what's called small cell antennas. So there's going to be one antenna at every traffic light in New York City, for example. So that way, when you're in the street, you can actually be connected from multiple antennas at once, and also from other users. So there's going to be a kind of geolocation of multiple signals, and it's going to be more beams than just waves like this. So the technology is going to be more precise, but there are also downsides with that. And one of them is the multiplication of sources. So the number of antennas will be duplicated by thousands in downtown areas, for example.
Wow. So maybe some people are not quite aware of the EMF. So I don't think we have to go back to explain every EMF, but maybe what do you think are the most concerning ones? Is it the cell phones? Is it the wireless networks? Which ones are the most concerning that people should be aware of?
I think it's the overall exposure, and I think the number one source is cell phones for people, especially the way they use them. So whether it's the patient or client that uses a cell phone next to the ear all the time, all day, every day. Well, if you look at the data, it's of course it's still controversial, but Leonard Hardell has shown that in heavy users, and sometimes they're defined as only 30 minutes a day, which is kind of ridiculous to me. To me, a heavy user should be, I don't know, 2 to 4 hours at least. But still, people talk 12 hours a day on the cell phone. I'm talking realtors and I don't know, people that are in law, people that work on Wall Street. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy. People are plugged all day, every day, and including Bluetooth earpieces. Some of these earpieces are so strong that they're as bad as a cell phone. So it's one part of the equation. And then I would say just keeping the phone on the body could be a factor of risk, especially in cancer development, because if it's pulsing, let's say in a bra, there are some reports, especially John West from California. He's a researcher who looked at very bizarre cases of breast cancer in women, and each one of them had tumors that mimicked the shape of a cell phone very bizarrely, and also it was in a bizarre position in the breast. So I think it was the upper inner quadrant, or a shape that it's really a placement that's unlikely in breast cancer, you know. So this is a series of patient cases he talked about a few years ago. So there's that, and then if you keep it in your pocket, the impact on fertility in men, although it's not been defined, like, okay, is it 15% or 20% or 25% for XYZ amount of, we would need dosimetry studies when we see exposure and then we see a correlation with sperm count. There's in the last 10 years, I've identified 201 studies that each concluded sperm count is affected by EMFs, by signals that, if you believe the really skeptics, these non-ionizing signals should not have any biological effect beside heating, which is ludicrous. When you look at the science, it says, most of the science says the opposite, or at least so much of the science that it would be silly to conclude it does nothing.
Okay, so maybe that's what we should go into now. So basically, I think even a lot of practitioners don't really know how exactly, let's say, dangerous EMFs or harmful EMFs, because we know there's good and bad ones, can harm the cellular biology and can harm the body. Do you want to chase on that rabbit hole a little bit?
Sure. Well, people need mechanism to understand this thing, Jan. It's super important. People will say, for example, well, there's no part of the cell that can pick up these low-level signals. So how is it possible that our biology picks up these signals? And in reality, the main problem I see as a journalist is people that are super intelligent in their field but don't talk to each other. So you have engineers, you have people from the tech industry, and you have the IEEE, that is the electronic engineers, that say, well, only heating matters, the human cell doesn't have a sensor, doesn't make sense that we could be affected. But when you look at the biophysics, actually you zoom in onto a cell and you look, okay, is there a part of the cell that works with electricity? For example, well, we know membrane exchanges, and when you understand the biophysics a little bit more, and I understand just the shallow understanding of it, and I know that, well, I don't know, a red blood cell has a zeta potential, and that's electricity around the red blood cell that make the red blood cells repel each other. That's magnetism. This is how the red blood cells are able to not clump together. This is something that's not, I'm not, I don't know, coming up with something. It's something proven in biology. So when you look at the biophysics, it turns out that certain parts of the cell can be impacted by these low-level EMFs. For example, one work that is to be, I think every practitioner in the world should look at least one presentation from this guy, Dr. Martin Pall, Pall, and he showed in his work at first that multiple chemical sensitivity was caused by excessive activity of the NMDA receptors in the brain, and then this causes excessive calcium to flow into the cell. And the results of that is excessive peroxynitrite production, which is a reactive nitrogen species that is linked with mitochondrial dysfunction, and that is known as a potential very harsh oxidant for the cell that could technically lead to DNA damage and all sorts of things. So instead of breaking your DNA directly like you would have with gamma rays or with X-rays, it's indirect damage. Well, guess what does the exact same thing? From Paul's work more recently, 2013, he won this paper won an award, and it's VGCC activation, the voltage-gated calcium channel. So it means that if you have these calcium channels stay open because of the EMFs will disrupt not the calcium channels itself, but the sensors that are minuscule on the calcium channels react to voltage gated, right? So if you have even background levels in a city, you can have a disruption of this calcium channel. So let's say if your client or patient has on top of that a genetic predisposition to having VGCC problem that is seen in certain neurological diseases. And if you look VGCC and autism, there are links with problems in neurology, because the VGCCs, one of the highest concentration of VGCCs is in the neurons and nervous system and testes, ovaries, and the heart. So these are the different parts that you see in science are affected by EMFs. It looks like people that have something called electro-hypersensitivity, or maybe they have a certain predisposition to having more problems with these calcium channels. Maybe the calcium channels react to lower voltage. Maybe the calcium channels stay open longer. Maybe the body has a hard time because maybe all your defenses are down. You don't have glutathione. You don't have SOD production. And then you cannot quench this peroxynitrite that is created. So in the 100-foot view understanding of this is that it causes oxidative stress in the cell. That's it. Just like any other environmental toxin would do. The problem is that first, we cannot quantify the exposure of most people, right? How much are we exposed? When they look, for example, people working with X-rays, you have a mandatory dosimeter that you wear, so that way you know exactly I've been exposed to how much radiation, and if it's too much, well, you got to take a vacation. Right now, no one has that, and you don't know, for example, if your patients or clients are exposed to a cell phone under the pillow. So even though maybe they're not a cell phone user that much, but maybe they have this bad habit of having it right here as they try to sleep. And one of the effects of, well, everything, the calcium channels and everything, is melatonin disruption, and the pineal gland thinking it's bright daylight. So it's seen a melatonin disruption and so many other effects that might disrupt a normal healing rhythm.
Wow, I'm stunned.
Well, I'm glad.
I'm going to be quiet for a second.
Well, do you want me to share something else? That's something else that's extremely important for me. And I'm a journalist, and I want to stay as close to the truth as possible. So I have a hard time saying things like, okay, EMFs are definitely dangerous. I can say one thing. When I talk with doctors that treat very sick patients, they live in reality. We so far the discussion have been about theory, pathways, effects, studies. Yes, there is a place and time for these, but what about clinical observations? Right. I talked with Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and this is included in the course. We're going to talk about this in a second. I talked with him, and it shocked me what he told me. Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, for those of you who don't know, he's part of the Sophia Health Institute, and he told me the average patient that I see has seen 23 other holistic practitioners before me. 23, that's the average. So it means maybe there's one that's has seen 50, right? So these people essentially do not get better. They have been through every Lyme and nutraceutical protocol you can imagine, the saunas, the energy healers, everything. And what he tells me, Nick, the number one overlooked factor is reducing EMFs. This is the one thing that everyone is missing. And now, I'm not arguing that if you reduce EMFs, you're eliminating the one cause of disease. It's not like that. But it does seem that in a clinical setting, if you're trying to heal, going back to a natural environment, which includes the background levels of EMFs that just 30 years ago we were exposed to, it makes sense, right? It's just, let's say a lot of people, paleo movement, okay, eating like our ancestors, maybe having the levels of stress of our ancestors, ancestral lifestyle, the blue zones, people live longer when they follow something that resembles the era before chronic disease. Right. So that's the 30s and the 1900s. And yes, at times there were famines and other problems. But when you look at people that didn't get access to that or didn't get affected by these, you have very healthy populations that live very long with no cancer. That's undeniable. Well, the average levels in a city right now that I'm being exposed to just from passing cars in the street, it's a quintillion times higher than back in Mother Nature when it comes to microwave radiation.
So basically, it's right in front of our face, but we don't see it or we don't think about it.
Exactly. We don't see it. So, but what Klinghardt sees is when he goes in, first, it requires their patients, every single one of his patients gets fired by Klinghardt if they do not comply with a few basic rules of removing EMFs. And that's something that tells you the guy is not nuts, or I don't believe, like, he sees the patient outcomes. For example, he tells me ALS patients, autistic kids, people with Alzheimer's, early onset of dementia, people with nervous system breakdown, autoimmunity, all sorts of sick patients, when he starts removing the EMFs, now they sleep okay, now they heal better. It's just a matter of creating a healing environment. So it seems that if you put an autistic kid in a high EMF environment, it's pretty much like putting him in a room where everyone is playing loud music. They are hypersensitive to every aspect that could affect human biology. Light, sound environment, stress, emotional stress around. If people are complaining, if people are screaming, angry, autistic kids are now known to react very strongly to that. Even colors, like they can react to something that is too colorful or blinding. So EMFs, we can feel it, our biology can feel it, but it's so hard to grasp. So in a clinical setting, what made me want to put a course together in the first place is these clinical findings that say, maybe we can save more lives, maybe we can get people better faster if we only tell them a few things. The healthier patients or clients, you probably have a standard set of recommendations to tell them, turning out the Wi-Fi at night, this and that. But for people extremely sick, just like you would tell them to avoid chemicals way more than the average athlete that's super healthy, well, maybe they need to avoid EMFs to a greater extent. And maybe you'll see them get better only when you align everything right. Diet, nutraceutical, stress, but also EMFs. And this is the part that is ignored by a vast majority of holistic practitioners. And the reason is simple. The topic doesn't look credible at first. Mm-hmm. The science is, let's say well, sometimes it says yes, sometimes it says no. Exactly. And it's repressed, and no holistic practitioner training or certification in any school, any program I could think of, I looked everywhere. I'm like, okay, there's going to be someone talking about this. And the answer is no. I think that holistic medicine has to play catch up because it's brand new, this exposure. It's been only 10 years, but people are already feeling the effects of this new kind of modern toxic exposure, if you want to put it into these words.
Yeah, interesting. So I have the feeling that both the layman and the practitioner will feel a little overwhelmed being confronted with so much information. So
yeah,
you try to write your book so that's easily understandable for the reader, no matter where they come from. But when I read it, it seemed to be just a rough introduction to the topic. So tell me about your course, and tell me what you're offering and who it is meant for and how it is structured and all these things.
Sure. So the course is called Electro-smogRX, and you can find it at electrosmogrx.com/Jan. So that's JAN. And so basically the course is 5 webinars delivered in 5 weeks. And the reason I wanted to go beyond the book is that the book is a great introduction, sure. But if you're a practitioner, of any level that plays in functional medicine. So I've got acupuncturists interested in this, chiropractors, MDs, NDs, naturopathic doctors, osteopaths, even, well, functional nutrition diagnosis or any other certification where you want to look at every aspect of health. Then I don't think the book is sufficient, because in the program we get into 5 different aspects. The first webinar is about EMF basics. This is basically the book, essentially, but the short version. So if you don't want to read the book, you don't have time, in just 1 hour, we're going to go over the frequencies, the exposure, the sources, and what EMFs are in the EMF spectrum. So just you can get the gist of it. It's not important that you get all the details. And this is what's overwhelming for practitioners, is sometimes there are so many different things and the frequencies and this and that. You just want to know the basics so that you can identify, okay, that's a source of EMFs and this is a source of EMFs. And then I also wanted to go in just an overall review of the science available and why is the science so controversial and what's credible and what's not. So that way you can recognize exactly what is lacking from the current science. And also I've identified several hints at why is the science extremely insufficient right now. But there are good hints, for example, that every study that was made using an EMF generator instead of a real cell phone misses part of the biological effect. So there are so many hints about why is our science kind of not showing that people are getting sicker than compared to the reality. And in module 3, it's about symptoms. So it's not only about just identifying, it's identifying which patient that maybe has symptoms where part of their symptom could be attributed to EMFs. And it's not just insomnia. For example, anyone that has any kind of depression or anxiety problem, we know that the excitation, oftentimes they have problem with their NMDA receptor, and basically it's EMFs are part of these excitatory toxins that make your brain kind of fire up. So if they have extremely low serotonin all the time, they have even suicidal thoughts, there are all links with certain profiles of individuals. So symptomology also includes what should you add to your questionnaires as a practitioner? Because if you take a patient or client history, it's important that you ask them, okay, did you have a traumatic event in your childhood? All these things that you do not want to miss. Were you bitten by a tick bite? I mean, some of these is now obvious, but 10 years ago it was not, right? So, for example, questions that just most practitioners, I think, will forget. Do you sleep with a cell phone under your head? It's as silly as that. Just adding that. Or did you realize if they had symptoms that started all of a sudden, one common complaint is smart meters were installed, and maybe you'll realize that on the other side of their bedroom, there's a wall with these smart meters pulsing. And in that case, you need mitigation strategies. And this is module 4. So the 4th webinar goes into how to remove sources. And also, so the basic version of mitigation. In 1 hour, there's only so much we can tell, but I can tell you when to hire a building biologist, for example, which would be the best guy to go at your patient's or client's place and clean up the environment. But there's also a ton you can tell your patients or clients to do. And module 5 is looking at EMF resilience. So what kind of supplements Klinghardt uses to reduce EMF sensitivity. So it surprised me a lot, Jan, because in my interview with Klinghardt, he told me things that I did not expect. He told me I'm using, for example, rosemary extract and bee propolis, and these seem to reduce EMF sensitivity. I actually never heard about that. So we'll get into the reasons, what brands he recommends, and also how to raise, for example, the NRF2 pathway that is known. This is a pathway in the human body. If you do intermittent fasting, if you take certain classes of antioxidant, this is a popular pathway nowadays that we hear more and more of, even cold thermogenesis. When you have sufficient exposure to natural sunlight, also you'll raise it. This NRF2 pathway, it raises your glutathione, it raises your SOD. So these will help you quench the peroxynitrite. So the EMF exposure, you can actually strengthen your patient and client resilience, because let's face it, even if you tell them everything I want you to tell them, they will get exposed outside. They will get exposed at the mall. They will get exposed by the public Wi-Fi hotspot in a Starbucks, from the neighbor on the train. So it's inevitable unless they live in the middle of the forest, that they will get exposed. So it's also solutions to start looking into, okay, how can I make them stronger to kind of, I don't know, prevent the bucket from overflowing, you know?
Yeah, it seems to correlate with what I hear from environmental medicine practitioners that have, decades of experience. And from their experience, what they have seen is that the electro hypersensitivity seems to start as an advanced level of, toxin load in the body, which would correlate with what you said, glutathione depletion, too many toxins, the resiliency goes down. And that's when you can start feeling the EMFs, actually feeling them. Doesn't mean that they do damage otherwise, but then suddenly you're like, oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Interesting. So basically, to me, it is like as if you're opening this whole new world to people, to practitioners. But I think we also have to open it to the public so that our patients and clients understand what we're talking to them about, right? So it seems like we have all these pillars, we have the pathogens, we have the nutrients, we have the toxins. So we talk to everybody about it, but we're missing. And actually, I think most really advanced practitioners, they think about EMFs. And like you said, they say, okay, try to turn off the wireless at night. Try to turn off the cellular data on your cell phone when you don't use it. Those simple tricks. But I guess we're not really trained in really understanding how important it is. And that it's just maybe a pillar of the same importance that carries the building as the others. And we think, oh, it's just a tiny little thing.
Exactly. It goes beyond just turning off the Wi-Fi at night and what I talk about in the book. It's great. And honestly, for healthy people, it's probably not an issue. I wouldn't say it's not an issue, but I mean, they will, I think most people, but let's face it, healthy people, they're rare to find these days. And getting more rare to find really healthy people that feel incredible and that eat junk and that get exposed to EMFs and are like, oh no, I'm just fine. It's getting rare, and the chronic disease is just increasing so much. So I'd rather have you have all the tools to be able to. It's prevention, is diagnosis, and also treatment of EMF related disease. And I want to say something. Everything that I share is still, it's a field that's basically doesn't exist almost. There's a few researchers, there's Dominique Belpom and friends that looks at EHS cases and that quantifies the biomarkers. And this is serious work. He's almost all working out of pocket from what I know because he doesn't have a lot of financing. There's not a lot of studies proving and showing that. But what I want to offer is the basic training you need to start experimenting with different things. Maybe using the same recommendations as Klinghardt, even turning off the circuit breakers at night and seeing how people respond. And you might find that these interventions that are mostly free or low cost and literally will not add to the bulk of course, its patient compliance might be hard, and it's something that we'll address as well. What kind of tricks other practitioners have found to convince them, because they can be like, oh, come on, doc, you're telling me there's invisible signals harming me. I even have a hard time taking my vitamin C right now. So are you kidding me? Turning off the Wi-Fi? It's my best friend. It's hard. But for people that are extremely sick and that are willing to try anything and that are just not getting better, for example, Lyme disease patients, that their protocol, yes, it gets them a little bit better, but you feel like, why are we not getting to the bottom of this? Klinghardt personally, he says there are two types of Lyme disease patients: those who listen to my recommendations for EMFs and they get better, and those who don't and they don't get better. That's how radical he sees two categories of patients. And again, it might be, there's a lot of things that we'll address in the science module and science webinar, but it's reactivation of pathogens from the EMFs itself. Maybe it's the immune disrupting effects of EMFs. We don't know. It's not a course where you will learn exactly what is definitive. Everything is exploratory, but there are good signs and good things that you'll learn that you will be able to apply on Monday morning in your practice and start seeing results or start not seeing results. and see, okay, there's something else happening, but you'll eliminate these factors. In your detective work, it's so important. And I think most people listening to this right now, even if you're applying, maybe turn your phone off at night and things like that, there are so many other aspects to it. So just forgetting the cordless phone, that is the DECT phone, and I turned off the people don't understand. You need to hit every one of these sources, and we'll have also cheat sheets to give hands out to give your patients, like, list me all the different devices that are emitting at home, and then turn them off for a while. And if they get better, you see, even if they get better, you will feel good, because you'll discover that, oh, maybe Nick and Jan aren't talking out of their hats right now. They're actually, it's actually true. And then as a practitioner, you'll feel good about it. And then your patient or client's compliance will go skyrocketing, because they will feel, oh my God, I sleep better for the first time in weeks. It turns out it was my Wi-Fi. All of a sudden, they don't feel as excited about Wi-Fi. And it's how it happened for me and so many other people.
It's crazy. So I'm really big in prevention. I think I just had a breakthrough maybe last week where I realized it's all about prevention. And a lot of our clients or patients are not aware of that they're sick. They are in what we call the comfort zone, or the zone of false wellness. So you don't feel any symptoms. But if you do a specific sensitive test, you would see there's issues, right? You would see there's biomarkers out of range. You're heading towards heart disease or heading towards autoimmune. So I'm thinking, so basically we're having this new field, and we're basically laying the foundation, right? So that's what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
We're laying the foundation. Yes. We're gonna just build it out over the coming years. And it's based on science. It's not based on woo-woo conspiracy theories. So it's science-based, and I think you're really one of the first ones bringing this out. I think we have to have you target EHS and, maybe a TriCon. So we have to get you into some conferences so that more people can hear this. But basically,
I love it.
Yeah, we're at the cutting edge, right? So people can have the chance now to jump on and get the early learning, kind of the early adopter learning curve. So I think that's great.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a client last week. I want to tell you this. It was last week, I think. So we were talking for quite a while about all these exposures and all these problems that just wouldn't get better. And I happened to ask her about EMFs, just, because I do that. And she's like, oh yeah, it's good that you say that, the wireless. And I'm like, what's going on with the wireless? She's like, it's in our sleeping room. And I'm like, no. Like, you put it in your sleeping room? And she's like, it's not just that. It's under my bed. And she just saw my look. I didn't say a word. She just saw my eyes, and she's like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, yes. So she was sleeping for 1.5 years or more on top of the wireless router.
Yes.
Under her bed. And I was like, oh my goodness, this session is over. Like, we don't have to talk anymore. Go home and move that wireless router and move it as far away from you as possible. And then at night, turn it off on top of it and tell your family, okay, I'm going to bed. Wireless is going off. That was the minimum we could do for that person in that week. So we're going to meet again.
But you see, it's not, so it didn't cost her a dime, or maybe rewiring or whatever, but most people, it's totally fine. So just move that. I've heard about my own dad he's somewhat of an extreme guy. So he literally, I think he might have destroyed his Wi-Fi router when I told him about it, but it was in front of his computer. So I have the computer right here, 2 feet from me. And he had his hard drive, and then the Wi-Fi router, and then maybe, I don't know, like a Himalayan salt lamp. Like, he had all these different things on his, and for him, it's just another electronic. You don't think about it twice, but the level of exposure from having that right in front of you is so staggering high. Is the equivalent of talking on a cell phone 8 hours a day. So if you say that the science looks credible as super heavy users and brain cancer and different things that are starting to emerge, and the worse it gets, the more you can say, well, what about the Wi-Fi router? It's the same thing. It's less studied, but it's the same signal, similar frequency and modulation, and the power density sometimes is worse than, so it emits more than a cell phone. I can tell you that. I've measured it. So it is just these sources that you don't want to miss. And as you said, you put it so eloquently. It's really laying the foundation. So I want to do an official partnership with Dr. Klinghardt. I'm working on that. Who knows if that's going to happen, but I'm going to interview even more people. I want to interview, I'm trying to get a hold of Dominic Belpom. He told me no, but let's say I reconnect later. So all these different researchers have some hints, and also any practitioner that is currently treating EHS. And there are a lot of them, like you said, the very advanced. Dr. Tom Cowden, I heard talk about that, and he's like, oh, EMFs, definitely. Klinghardt, definitely. But this information is in their heads. It's not out there. So we need to gather it together. And what I'm inviting people to do, if you want to be on the cutting edge, I invite you for something unique. And these 5 live webinars, you're going to have full replays. You're going to have the transcripts, the audio, the video. I know if you're super busy, you're like, oh, there's no way I'll attend these webinars. The webinars are on Monday evenings at 5 p.m. PST. For 5 consecutive weeks, but all the replays, and there's going to be a Q&A at the end of each webinar. So we're really going to build this off of what you see in your practice and questions you might have, like, oh, this patient doesn't get better. What do you think the exposure could be? Or what do you say? So we're going to explore all these questions together. So it's really an invitation. It's only for 100 practitioners, so we have very limited seating. But if you want to be at the cutting edge, I suggest you grab a seat, and it's at electrosmogrx.com/Jan, Jan. And it's really, if you want to be at a cutting edge. And then I want to tell something also. The course will be evolving. And if you join now, you will get access to future iterations. It will get better. I'll have tutorials on how to do an EMF assessment with an EMF meter, at least the short version, that you could help patient or client in your clinic see the exposure, right? It's super important. Yes. So these different things that you're going to learn in the future are also going to be included in there. So it's also, if you join as let's say an early bird, you'll also get access to future iterations for a fraction of the price. So it's also joining a movement to revolutionize, I think, this missing link in the healthcare.
Okay. So it's basically a 5-week course, and it's live, and
yes.
it's on Monday evening. What are the times?
It's 5 p.m. PST, 8 p.m. EST on Mondays.
Well, that seems doable. So, I mean, I'm in the same problem. There's tons of webinars out there. There's tons of stuff where you're like, I have so many good recordings of really good conferences lying on my desk. I don't know when to do it. But I have the feeling this electromagnetic sensitivity and field topic is really important because, like you said, we didn't even mention this much. I didn't ask you much about numbers, but I think you mentioned that maybe 30 years ago, the exposure was very low. It was mostly maybe radio frequency and then some power lines. Now we're in the 4G age. There's public wireless everywhere, basically, on trains, on buses. Every house has a wireless router now. Every public spot has like 10. I'm in an old building. I'm in a 100-year-old building. I don't have wireless in my office on purpose. But I have a full reception of about 15 wireless networks here. And that's everything, printers, everything. So we're moving into this age of the Internet of Things where all the machines, everything is connected. I just bought an advanced air filter and it had Bluetooth and wireless. And I was like, I don't want that. I don't need that. Where can I turn it off? So basically we're going to have all these machines around us emitting radiation on top of what we're already seeing and on top of all the other exposures, right? So I think it's an important topic. And for people that understand how important, for me, I think with this topic, I'll drop everything and hop in because I need to learn more. I've always been careful, but despite being careful, let me tell you, I did develop electromagnetic hypersensitivity just for one weekend at a environmental medicine conference at a hotel where the hotel was mold infested. So I wasn't doing well as a baseline to start off. I think the hotel was basically blowing mold spores into the room. And then you have a couple 100 doctors sitting there with every computer connected to the Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
And, nobody's aware of what they're doing. The organizers were trying to discourage Wi-Fi use, but it was crazy. So I had to leave the room. As soon as I left the room, I was okay. As soon as I came back in the room, I was like getting really sick and sensitive, headaches, all kinds of stuff. So I actually experienced it myself, and it was not pleasant. So I think we're moving in this, and the topic is so important that even though you try to avoid things, like you said, there's a baseline radiation. We have to learn about it. We have to understand how it affects us and our clients and patients. And I think, yeah, I'm going to jump on. I'm going to join you in this course. Monday night goes up on my calendar, and I'm very curious. I think we have to really develop this field. I think it's awesome what you do.
Thank you, and thanks for joining. I'm very excited to have you on board, and other practitioners that want to join. Well, it's really an invitation. Either way, if you decide not to take the course, please look at it. At least do a little bit more research that you would normally do. I know there are so many emerging things to learn about: epigenetics, intermittent fasting, ketosis. I mean, it's countless, the topics. It's exciting times at the same time, because we have all these tools. But do not forget about EMFs, and look into it, and just doing a couple of tests with your patients or client population, I'm sure you will see the difference. And then you'll understand, oh my God, there is this such a low-hanging fruit, right, to just grab and start applying to your practice. And I think basically it will make anything that you throw at your clients or patient even better, more effective. Yeah, right? So
it doesn't cost us a penny to ask cell phone questions and Wi-Fi questions and power line questions. It doesn't cost us more than 5 minutes, and it doesn't cost the patients or clients a lot to think about it, go home and turn it off at night, right? It's no stress, no money, basically, at least in the beginning when you start to just, decrease exposure, maybe 50% or something. Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. Great. I have the feeling we're going to talk again.
Sure.
I have some questions in the back of my mind that I would like to ask you, but they're a little more advanced. Maybe I'll throw them out here so you can think about it. So I'm getting a little concerned. There's companies out there that sell these little like wireless chips that are supposedly, like mysteriously blah, blah, blah. But I am on your side. I'm on the science side. So when I measure an electromagnetic field and I apply a chip and that field is still measurable, somebody will have to explain to me how that chip is supposed to protect you when the measurement is still there, Yeah. So we'll talk maybe about that in the future. I tried one of those when I was electromagnetically sensitive, and it did not change a bit. So it didn't change.
I'll talk about that in the course a little bit, because it is a common concern, and there are some interesting biophysics that could explain how they might work, but I've not seen convincing evidence of something that's miraculous. Or else everything would be sorted out. I would just be pitching a chip right now, but it's not the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's talk about that, and it's good you're doing that in the course. And then I think we'll talk again once there are updates or.
Sure, I'd love to.
Great. It was nice talking to you. I'm excited. I'm going to be on. When does the course start?
It starts on March 12th. So if you're listening to this, the cards are open and there are 100 spots. So far, 90 remaining, and it's sold until, the evening of March 11, and then the next day, March 12, 5 p.m. PST, 8 p.m. EST. It starts with the first webinar. If you can't make it live, all the replays will be available shortly after each webinar. Okay, we're going to post that. I'm going to post that as a separate link so people can find that. Sure. And I'm excited to see you on March 12th. That'd be great. Well, I'm going to keep you posted. Okay. Thank you very much. See you. All right. Thank you, Jan. Bye-bye.